Today's issue of the week: did the EPA just shut down work on a major development here in Haverford Township? Today's issue of the week requires me to tell you a little bit of a story, and it starts on Friday, May 1st, 2015, when I received a phone call. First, it was a voicemail message to the Haverford 7 show from a concerned citizen who wanted to remain anonymous. He wanted to tell me about some concerned citizens along Washington Avenue and also along Harvard Road, where there is a significant development going on. There are 7 houses that are being built there, and the person left a message and said that work had been stopped there because the EPA had stepped in and found major problems, and that some of the residents had been smelling gasoline smells of some sort, petroleum kind of smells. So I took a stroll down there, and we have some pictures to look at from the site. So the site is, there's an extension of Harvard Road that goes into where the site is being built, and you can find all kinds of construction equipment there. And if you check around, there is evidence where they started to dig for the foundations of the property. And sure enough, if you look, you find a great deal of oily substance that's kind of filling in the base of where that excavation has been taking place. And so the question is, what the heck is that, and where is it coming from? Is it serious? And clearly the residents are worried that, you know, if this stuff is coming up out of the ground at that site, is there any kind of risk that it could come up under their homes or contaminate them in some way? And some of the residents have said that when they have their windows open, they can actually smell this kind of gasoline sort of smell in the air. So that led to trying to figure out what's going on. So let's take a quick little stroll through some history about what this development is all about. I spent a great deal of time digging through some not so exciting minutes of the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners. So the story begins back in March 6th of 2013 when a local developer named Jeffrey Steigerwald purchased this property, this piece of land, for about $145,000. And he then brought a plan to the Planning Commission on April 11th, 2013, as you can see here. And it was just a sketch plan that he presented. And the plan was originally to build 8 single-family homes on this piece of property and extend Harvard Road as the entrance to that development, and it would end in a cul-de-sac. That was the plan. Fast forward to December 12, 2013, when the Township Planning Commission actually approved this plan, contingent on the developer addressing some of the issues that the township engineer required them to address. And it was things about slope and water drainage and things like that. That's all it says in the minutes, and more about why that's interesting in just a second. So then that takes us to January 13th of 2014, when it moves from the Planning Commission to the actual Board of Commissioners, and the plan is presented and the board unanimously votes to move forward with this. So they passed Resolution 1915 of 2014 approving this development, but it's been reduced now to 7 properties. So they're going to take this 2.95 acre lot, divide it into 7 brand new residential homes. Okay. Not all that interesting, except now the question is, where's that oil coming from? Well, it turns out this piece of land was originally an industrial site. It was the site of the McCandless Fuel Oil Company. There were big tanks sitting on the ground there, and there were railroad tracks, and the trains would pull up and offload kerosene and diesel into those tanks. And that was there for years, until about 14 years ago when it was sold and that was, torn out. So you had these big tanks there, and it turns out there were underground pipes where things were kind of moved around between those tanks. So what's interesting about going through all of the Planning Commission minutes and the Board of Commissioner minutes about this development is that there's no mention anywhere about this. There is, actually I shouldn't say that, there's one reference to this having been the former site of the McCandless Fuel Oil Company, but there's no mention of EPA or the Department of Environmental Protection from the state of Pennsylvania in those records. And the reason that's important is that in researching this story and trying to figure out what's going on, I actually spoke to the EPA this morning, in fact, and the EPA has confirmed that this site is actually mostly being managed through the Pennsylvania side, but EPA is also involved. And it is part of what they call an Act 2 land recycling program. I didn't know about this program. You probably don't either. So it's a program that the state has where it actually works together with private developers to get the private developer to clean up former sites that are contaminated because they were industrial or commercial sites. Interesting, like I said, that that's not reflected anywhere in the township discussion, including the engineer reports, the ones that I was able to see in the minutes there. There's talk of other issues like, stormwater, but there's no talk about, contaminated ground. So the purpose of the Act 2 is to get as I said, to get developers to clean up these former industrial sites. So back to the phone call I got last Friday. Part of the call and the conversation I had when the person called back, again anonymously, I don't know who the person was, but we had a chat about what was going on and what the residents' concerns were. And the story was that the EPA had shut down this site. So the question is that true? Well, in my conversation with the EPA, the answer is no, not exactly. The site has been, work at the site has stopped, and the EPA has been there just recently. So the EPA is taking samples of what this oily substance is, and they've sent it out to the lab, and the EPA says the results should be back either Friday of this week or early next week. So we'll follow up with a follow-up story as soon as we know what those results are. But in the meantime, the developer has voluntarily suspended work until the results of this lab work come back. So the other thing that's interesting here is, remember I said that back in January of 2014 at the commissioners meeting, that was January 13th, they approved this plan. The question is, who actually owns this property? I thought it was Jeffrey Steigerwalt, but in reviewing the records, it turns out that 2 days prior to the approval of the plan, the property was actually sold. So on December 11th, 2014, Steigerwalt's company, which is Harvard Road Development, LLC, sold the property for about $690,000 to a new company, which we only know as Harvard 7 LLC. They're based in Audubon, Pennsylvania. There's no information in the records that I can find of who is behind Harvard 7 LLC. But the point is that Harvard 7 LLC is working together with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection on this Act 2 property, and they are cooperating with each other, and both the EPA and the DEP say that they're waiting for results and that they are pleased that the owner has voluntarily suspended the work there, pending what they figure out goes on. Now, remember that the purpose of Act 2 is to help private people develop property, take contaminated sites and bring them back to life in a sense, and make them into productive properties that generate tax revenue and things like that. So in theory, it's a good thing, right? And the trade is that the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection gives liability protection to that developer. So that is part of what residents need to understand here, is that the state has agreed to do this, and that the state is standing behind that, and there's a plan that's been worked out together with the developer to remediate this site, depending what they find, and figure out what to do. So there are some questions that come up about that we're going to keep looking into. So EPA has an on-site coordinator who was there actually yesterday, and actually today as well. Rich Rupert is his name. He reports that there is no immediate threat to local residents. They've done water samples of Naylor's Run and found no sign that anything is leaching into the water there. They've taken air samples and said that they're not particularly high, whatever that actually means. And so they're waiting on these results to see what comes of it. So even though there's odor in the air, I mean, if you are near the site, you may catch a whiff of what they believe to be kerosene and diesel fuel, because that's what the McCandless Oil Company had in those tanks. So they suspect that that's what that is. You'll find an article that was published earlier today in the Delaware County Times from Lois Puglianesi, who we consulted with, and much appreciation to her for sharing information with us, and we were sharing information with her as well to help each other's stories out. So that's where things stand at this point. So yes, there is some reason to be concerned. There is contamination in the ground, but it turns out that has always been known, though much of it has been kind of bubbling up now that they actually dug deep enough into these foundations to get that going. So To be continued is the end of this story at this point. We're going to wait for the EPA results to come in and report back to you. We'll try to get some more information from DEP if we can get more. There's not much on the website that you can find. There's just some notifications about certifications that were applied for and approved. So that's where we stand at this point. So no need to panic. There's no giant conspiracy going on here. The DEP and the EPA have been working with the developer from the get-go here and monitoring what's going on. It's part of a controlled program to try to remediate things. Again, the interesting thing, though, is why didn't anyone know that? Why do people who live on the block right near there have no idea that this was going on or that there was even contamination in the ground? Why is this not part of what was openly discussed, at least as reflected in the minutes of commissioners' meetings or the Planning Commission meetings? Maybe there are things that are just not necessarily notated down there. I don't know. It seems to me that we all need to know what's going on in our backyard. And again, the theme of the show is who is doing what and why. So that's what we know so far. And I promise we'll come back to you as soon as we know more. So for now, that's the issue of the week. Signing off from the 7th Ward, this is Dr. Mark Kossman.